And one thing within that got me thinking, I feel like God kind of threw some thoughts at me even while driving here, is that one thing I appreciate about my husband is that he believes I have something to say. Right? And how important that in any relationship, not just a marriage, is to believe in someone, that their voice matters, that they have something to say. So as much as a married couple, and maybe if their words aren't there yet, that's okay, because the more opportunity you give them, the more that they will get there. And the same thing with our kids, to always speak over them, like their voice is important, that they do have something to say. And so that kind of just came to me this morning. I remember when we were here, we got married in this church. And I think it was right after we got married, Adam was also leading the young adults. And we had one night here where we were just praying, and he made each one of us make up like a 10-minute sermon right then and there that night, even in the midst of worship. So I'd have to say, even in this place is the first time I spoke anything, and it's because of him. And I'm so kind of think of the people that paved the way for you to have your first moments, right? And the other churches I've been to, they paved the way for me to be able to be on stage and play my instrument, play my craft, even when I was back in high school. The Methodist church I went to, they're like, sure, play your viola for us, A church I really developed spiritually in Kearney gave me a place in the worship team. So they just really be grateful for those who kind of helped pave the way, who saw something in us, who considered our future, which is going to bring me into the verses that I kind of felt led to. So while Adam and I were talking and praying, I was reminded about a couple years ago, Adam and I were very blessed to be able to take a trip to Greece together for our 11th? Our 10th anniversary. It's been 12 years. For our 10th anniversary. And during that, I was reading this book, because, without kids and being able to lay on the beach, you're able to actually read a book on the beach, which is amazing. Obviously, as they get older, those who have their kids are older, you get to have some of those privileges, but for us, it's not right now. But when you're by yourselves, I was reading this book, and all of a sudden, it came to a verse in Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 9. And in the middle of it, I'm just going to, about the second half of the verse, it says, now this is speaking of Jerusalem's downfall, right? They fell bad. They're in captivity. And in the middle of this verse, it says, she, as in Israel, did not consider her destiny, therefore her collapse was awesome. And in other translations, or the Amplified, which is not, Adam says it's not a translation. He calls it the Woman's Bible. It was also his, many of you also knew and loved Andrea, Adam's mom, and she loved the Amplified. And she was a woman of also many words and was able to really explain things well. But I want to read it in the Amplified real quick, because some things that they replace with some of the words I said was really quite fascinating. Let me just scroll to it here. She did not seriously consider her future. Therefore, she has come down from throne to slavery in an astonishing manner. And what hit me, or another translation, again, no thought for her future. Therefore, her fall was terrible. And it hit me as that when we don't have vision for our future, how there's a breakdown. There's a collapse, there's a calamity. And you're talking about in Lamentation, that's a corporate downfall. That's a corporate downfall because they lost the vision of their future. And how much so, that really spoke to me a couple years ago, thinking of just this current atmosphere, this current generation, how we're so quick to want the here and now and not consider our future. Sometimes our decisions that we make, we have to consider our future in order to make the right decisions. Right? And that goes collectively as well, because you're talking about a collective downfall here because they wanted not what God had for them. They wanted instant gratification. They wanted it their way. How much does that speak to right now? How many times we want things now, we want it our way, right? And not consider our future. Now, what was Israel's future? Israel's future was Jesus. That was their future. So you're talking collectively, they could not see God's redemption for them and what God had for them. And so they chose other things that put them into slavery. And you're talking about later in that verse, it says, well, look, right, Jerusalem is crying, oh Lord, look at my affliction, for the enemy has magnified himself. When we can't see the future and we can't see Jesus, the enemy looks really big. The enemy magnifies himself. And when you magnify something, what is it really? It's smaller than it looks, right? When you take a magnifying glass to a little bug, that bug looks awfully like a huge, think of some of those, like those old movies, where they took like a little bug and made it look like an alien, right? There was just a little bug that was magnified to look terrible. So when we lose our vision, when we lose the vision of our future, how much the enemy can come up and say, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. That's not redeemable. That's not what that God really had for you. You lost that. That's gone. How much of a lie that is. Especially how many times in relationships, how sometimes I know Anne was talking earlier about, had to go through some things to really keep a relationship that God had, right? And we had to consider the future, even though in the midst, maybe sometimes in current feelings or situations, we can say, you know what, that's it, I'm done. I don't have the fight in with. God's like, no, there's you have to consider what is the future. Now, yes, I know there's some relationships that maybe do need to be shaved off for a season and whatnot, but sometimes we have to consider what's the destiny, what's the future to that God really has, and what's God saying to that. So I wanted to tie Lamentations 1:9 to Hebrews 12:2. Because what does Hebrews 12:2 tell us? Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. There's us twice there now. Let us run with endurance that the race is set before us, right? Collectively. Because why? Because us, before in Lamentations, chose the wrong thing. Now, us in Hebrews wants to run the race that is set before us, looking unto who? Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So there's the future. There's the vision that they did not have in Lamentations. And to think of for a second Lamentations, you're talking about setting their eyes on a future they didn't fully understand. That, right? The God's set into motion from the beginning of Genesis, Jesus, right? So the nation of Israel did not fully understand God's redemption plan. And so what does it look like as a people, as a generation, to still be fully committed to a plan that you might not see the fulfillment of? What does that look like, especially as a family, especially as parents, right? What does it look like to continue to say yes, to continue to look to the destiny of something we may never see the fulfillment of, right? There's some stuff that our children will do that we might not be able to see, or generations upon generations. But yet, as long as we stay faithful, as we continue our yes, what does that do? Help future generations to do the same. Right? Some of you have made decisions that will set up future generations, right? Some of you are first-generation Christians, and now you have set the course of your family line a total different way, right? Completely. Right, I've said this several times. I'm so grateful for Adam's parents because they said yes, and what that yes turned into, and turned to him and Aaron doing the right thing in ministry, which now also continue, hopefully see our kids do the same because of one generation saying yes. Right? So what does it look like for us to be the generation to say yes and to say, no, I'm not going to turn to that because it looks good right now. I'm going to say no to that because that's not going to help my future. And that as a collective, as a group, as a family, Jesus is our destiny, is our future, right? So looking unto him and ask collectively, God, what do you have for us as a family, as a couple, as a ministry, as a body of Christ? What do you have for us, and what is our mission to follow? And the second half of Hebrews 12:2, Jesus was for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. So Jesus also had a goal in mind. He had you in mind. And because he had the joy set before him, he still endured what he had to go through because he knew his destiny. He knew the future that God had set and planned thousands of years before. And you were that joy. And that means if Jesus is able to go through something so terrible that none of us would go through, how much more so we should be able to walk through whatever tribulations and trials and uncomfortable, should we be able to walk through that just to have Jesus set before us? Right? How encouraging that can be, even though no matter what you're going through right now, that can be hard, that can be just, and how all we have to do is say, Jesus, you're there. I know you're there. You are my goal. I can get through this. And what's good is that we don't have to do it alone, right? What is this constantly? Us. Jesus didn't do it alone, right? He had the Father, right? There's the Holy Spirit. There's that Trinity. God, he doesn't do it alone. There's community there. So how much more are we also created for community? And to do things to move forward together. So that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to say. And just when we go through things and kind of putting that bigger picture in front of us, because that bigger picture, it's kind of some practical things, us as a family, we've obviously family dynamic changes as first you're a couple, you're just married, you have a little more freedom, and you still got to do things though. You got to go to work at times, and there's things you do separately that still are for the good of the whole, right? And then kids come along, and then totally different dynamic, right? The things you do separately that still is for the good of the whole, right? There's sometimes I've had to stay back and do what was right for our family to allow him to do what God called him to do. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't love me, that, poor Sarah didn't get to go to the nations. Like, no, I still had to fulfill my commitment as a mother to make sure our kids are cared for, to still allow him to do what God called him to do. Now, God has also allowed me to do what I need to do. A couple years back, I got to go to Cambodia, and Adam held the fort down, and my parents helped as well, and I went forth, right? God will make a way when it's time for you to go forth and you have to do. But when we have, again, when we have that vision before us, that focus before us, when we have Jesus before us, that times where you have to do something that inconveniences you, there's flexibility involved, there's sacrifices involved, so we can endure and persevere and finish the race well. Right? So, thank you. I'm going to give it to Adam, and bless you guys.
Beautiful. All right, we're moving quickly into Q&A, right? So are you going to help with that? Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Are we going to sit?